couple of months ago, I interviewed Cade and Jay from Ecotech Marine, and you can see that full video by clicking on the link in the description below. But in this video, we're going to cover 5 tips for when you're using your Ecotech Radion lights. It'd be good to get some tips from you, that kind of stuff you don't see in a manual across, I suppose, the 4 main ranges of Radions, Vortex, Vectras and Versas. So now what's your tips around whether it be maintenance or setting up or using those products? If we start with Radion, what's your kind of tips for consumers on Radions?
I don't know that there's a whole lot. I mean, the most fundamental one is funnily one that you touched on, which is that that actually, if your tank is doing well,
don't touch it.
Don't change your lighting schedule or anything, actually, not just your lighting schedule. But you see a lot less of this now, but back in the day in particular, it was you go back even just a few years, and that was a big one. People seem to have learned that lesson in the hobby, or at least it's become common, knowledge that instead of people trying to chase difference all the time, that it's like set it, let the coral adjust, and let it acclimate. And that would probably be another one, is definitely acclimate coral with lighting. One actually tied into that is one of the interesting things which people probably realize but may or may not realize is a lot, particularly in the UK, same in the US, is a lot of retailers, maybe most retailers use Radion lighting, or a large percentage of them do. Mm-hmm. You can just ask them, particularly if you're buying a new or a particularly expensive piece of coral, what they're running their lights at and what intensity, and with that information you can replicate it pretty easily. Just by placing in terms of depth in your tank, is probably the best way to put that. Rather than don't adjust your whole lighting schedule for one piece of coral, but figure out where in the tank replicates that same level of lighting, and then
slowly increasing and moving. Yeah, I think tips and tricks. I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing. If your tank, and like you said before with your Gen 3, like, there's no need to go in and change it. If your tank looks happy and everything looks good, there's no need to touch or change. That's something you see a lot of people doing, and you see someone going, oh, they're running this schedule, I'm going to try running this schedule. And like, if your tank has no issues and it looks good to your eye, I would definitely keep running what you're doing. And if you're just setting up a tank and a Radion for the first time, I would recommend getting a par meter. I think dialing and actually understanding, or borrow one. Like borrowing a par meter,
just playing with it, you can
figuring out what the par actually is and what the intensities actually are is something that will surprise you.
Yes.
It's something that you don't really know as like the average reefer, because I forever even was, hey, let's just go off the eyeball, look of the eye, and let's see how the corals are reacting, let's see how they're doing. And like, yeah, my tank's doing good, and all of a sudden you see the par afterwards, you're like, man, I would have never guessed it was that. So again, it's just something that it's starting to become more common practice, I think, as people are starting to set them up. But par meters, super
here's
helpful.
A fun one too as well. Hard learned. I always learn all my lessons the hard way. Is if you're gonna change your mounting or do anything involving physically manhandling your lights, take the time to turn them off, take them off of your tank, and get somebody to help you do it, rather than do what I do, which is like try to fiddle with it and then end up almost or potentially actually dumping my expensive lighting into my aquarium. I don't know if anyone else watching this has done this, but I think it's something that we all do in the reefing hobby all too frequently, is like we try to rush through like activities like that, it's funny, we're not really giving any like really good like tips about lighting.
This is kind of relevant. I always say, if you're going to make changes or you've got some heavy work to do in a tank, don't do it in the evening, because you end up rushing and you end up messing it up, and you'll get tired, you get a bit narky about it, and then something will go wrong, or you'll forget to turn something back on, or you do something. So we talk about it. So I've had someone who's dumped the Radion, fell into the tank for that very reason. They were messing around. So if I was going to mess around the light, that's why a really decent the cover, the jump guard, that helps to protect any of the kind of
saved by the jump guard.
the Radians, absolutely. Unless the light's really happy, really heavy, and it goes through the net. Usually, most things bounce off those things, so that does help. The other thing is, I see a lot of people that mess about with the spectrum on the light, and I get if you're an experienced reef. I've never done it, never felt the need to do it, because I like the templates, and then you just kind of look at the intensity on there. What's your view on, and obviously the flexibility is there, because you talked about it, Jay, at the top around those people who plug and play with AI around the adaptability, we say, but I think it's a bit of a risk. What's your view on that?
So this is something that I always find kind of, or I personally find kind of funny, because any quality light out there for aquariums at LED light already has an LED mix that is largely balanced towards a spectrum that will be successful for coral. So what that means is that the blue and white channels, like the LED mix in the fixture, is already heavily oriented towards achieving the spectral peaks that you want when you're running the channel on full across all of the spectrum, right? On all channels, right? So the only way to really mess that up is to really try to do something extreme in terms of deviating from what is on there, like by running, I mean, it's actually not even really that possible, but the more you deviate from whatever that spectrum is, I'm saying it's not really possible on on the Radions in particular, but like the more you try to deviate from that, the more likely you are to run into a problem where it's not going to grow coral or provide the right spectrum of light. Because it's not like you're getting an equal balance of blue, white, red, green, right? It's not like you have the same amount of energy going in. Already you're getting more blue LEDs, less white LEDs, less red and green, potentially whatever other colors UV are in there.
Yeah, there's a balance
right. Yeah. And also people's just tied into that, people's visual acuity is terrible. It's like, as human beings, we cannot, brightness and spectrum, we're actually terrible at being able to properly analyze with our eyes. Yeah. So that's, I mean, not that that's terribly relevant, but really what it comes down to is that messing with it isn't going to make a huge difference for the most part. And actually a lot of people think that they're having problems because of their spectrum, and typically it's a problem with their water chemistry, or they have pests or something else. Yeah. But really that's it. Like, and that's kind of a tip and a trick with these lights as well, is that actually intensity is probably more important than the spectrum mix if you're leaving them at relatively how they were configured out of the box.
Yeah. I'm kind of gonna jump on that a little bit with it. Like you said, the spectrums are there and made because they have been proven to be successful. Like, a lot of people have made those and had success, and they shared them. So we uploaded them, and we've seen enough success with them to go, hey, we know these work. Now dial in the PAR, dial in the intensity for your size tank. And like you said, you could run it that way. I'm not necessarily against people adjusting it, because other people have preferences for what they like. Some people like a little bit warmer. Some people like a little bit cooler spectrum. So it really depends. I'm really, again, fine with that. Some people are like, no reds and greens. But again, it's all preference and style.
And that won't make really any difference.
It's not going to make difference on things like that. You might notice different colors in your fish because you're not having the reds and greens, some different colors in your corals. So again, it's one of those things, it's all preference. We made the spectrums for a reason. I always say to people, if you're going to make changes, right away, dial into what you like. And again, run that for an extended period of time. You know the intensity, that. Like Jay said, if you're running issues, chances are it's not going to be that lighting causing that issue.
Yeah, because as you said before, the lights, regardless of most brands, will grow coral. It then comes down to personal preference. And as you say, it's far easier to mess something else up or not have it dialed in than the lights. But if you go back X number of years, lights may well have been a factor. In fact, you could probably overcook days rather than undercooking them, I would say. And undercooking is more around the positional in the tank, where it's shading it because something else in the way, or you got it too low, as opposed to the light in itself.
Yeah,
So
and that's it, like you kind of said, and that's where it's so important to dial it in right away and know where you're at. Like the par meter is super helpful for that.
yeah,
Again, reiterating that because, like you said, chances are you're not going to have a problem then with lighting. If you know where your levels are, you know where everything's at, it's not going to be that light because you know those specific corals like that kind of par or that par range. So there's probably some other reason in that tank why it's not succeeding.
Yeah.
So again, if you want to mess with the colors, it's all for it just because it's your preference in your tank. And like Jay said, it's really hard to make a spectrum or mess up a spectrum too much to not have success. Yes, you take out some colors, you might not get as much coloration in your coral or something along those lines. But again, the peak intensity and all is going to really help with that.
The other thing with programmable lights like the Radion, which people I don't know if people forget this or not, but I certainly forget it myself, and I'm somebody who talks about it all the time. But realistically, you can. The part of the beauty of the programmable light is that you can make the spectrum and the photo periods coincide to fit your life.
Yeah.
And when I say that, obviously, I'll use an example of say somebody subscribes to the Sanjay theory of coral reef keeping, which is to replicate the Australian shallow reef as closely as possible, which means as much light, as much flow as you can possibly cram into your tank at all times. And that's not an understatement. He lives that, his tank, and he grows coral as faster than anyone I've ever seen.
He runs a high energy tank, doesn't he? Because high flow,
everything,
high lighting. Sometimes people then up the temperature as well, and also their parameters in terms of alkalinity and that. So you raise it up because you've got high energy, high intake, high outtake. So you need all that kind of stuff into a balance.
It's all in balance, right?
Yeah.
But in that particular situation, running everything at maximum might not be very appealing to you in terms of how the tank looks visually.
Yeah.
But maybe you're home at 5 o'clock, so run for an hour, run a period which does something totally different. That is something that you like to look at, because the coral typically responds to DLI as much as it does to par. I mean, we did experiments early on where we proved that, and actually just talking to Carrie down at the Florida Aquarium, that's a big thing as they're replanting stuff onto the reef, is that the amount of energy that the coral receives over the day can vary, or is almost as important a measure to be looking at as what the spot par is in terms of a peak and a minus. And actually, if you go out there, apparently even in highlighting conditions, you'll see the par will vary hugely over a very short period of time as clouds come over, or stuff or sediment in the water, or literally all kinds of things. So the coral can handle that, but it also has a base energy requirement that it needs from the lighting. But because of that, you can play with that, and that was something that we talked about early on, or we discovered early on when we saw two different coral facilities. One where they kept the lights on for I think 14 hours, which was Worldwide Corals, and one Reef Wholesale, I think, where they kept it on for 8 hours. And the comparative par levels that they ran at were inverse of their time frames, and that actually from a DLI perspective they came in very close.
So what's DLI? Do you say DLI?
Light intake.
Ah, right.
Yeah,
okay.
Integral, but
yeah. So
it's like on a seed packet, where it shows the regions.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen a seed packet, that's actually sort of the DLI, because that's how agriculture is measured. Because what plants in agriculture care about is the amount of light that they receive over the lighting period, not what they receive at any given moment in time.
So again, it's same thing, like high energy, high output. So longer period, you could run lower par. Shorter period, run higher par to make sure you're around that same thing. So,
and they both work. I suppose it's down to your preference and how you want to set up your tank. And if you run one quite aggressively, should we say, or intensive, then you surround it with other measures that are the same. Otherwise, you're out of whack, and then of course, then that damages the livestock as well, or doesn't grow as optimum as it would like in a coral farm. That's the one thing you do want, is stuff that grows really quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
So is that where? So I know the kind of the AB plus and all those kind of templates. I remember reading that was that from coal farms in Canada? So is it that you still do that? You've got a number of different partners, should we call them, or users that you take that feedback from them and the data, and then that helps the evolution of the Radion product?
Yep. So it's a combination of that, and it's a combination of feedback from customers, because the two objectives are with lighting is to grow coral and achieve maximum color expression, which is a whole nother topic in itself. And then the other one is delivering on what people want, right? And that one is tied to the color, right? Well, it's tied to the color, but it's also tied to things like spread and value, right? And functions, things that the light does. So as we get that information from people, as we see it, as each generation goes by, that gets incorporated in.
I mean, that's prime example of the Radion Blue. So the Radion Blue is something that forever people are like, I want a bluer Radion. I want more blue. I want bluer. That was actually funny.
And then specifically, why am I paying to have the spectrum that I don't want?
Yeah.
For blue, like the blue user.
Why have whites?
You're right.
I want all
Fair
blues.
enough.
So then we made the blues for that reason. It was actually funny because when the G5 blue, they're like, oh, it's too blue. So we had to go a little bit less blue for the G6 blue because it was too much blue. And it was like, well, that's what you guys wanted.
Well, the G6 lets you choose your shade of blue,
Yes.
right? And that's always another funny thing about interpreting feedback, is that we all see color slightly differently as well.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
we certainly describe color differently. So, you get two people and it's like, I want more blue, and one person wants more like Windex blue, and the other wants more indigo blue, right? Which are completely opposite. More blue, right? Like more blue. Which blue do you like? So that's what we do. I mean, we take all of that feedback. The blue was a perfect example where, we're like, well, you just turn the other colors down. No, I want more, and I don't want to pay for it. Okay, well, we'll give you more value.
More par in the blues.
Yeah. All of your LEDs are now blue.